is only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
Hello and welcome to episode 18 of the Talking to the Dead podcast. This week, what's been swirling around my head probably since last week and was part of last week's messages coming through was very much again the question of communication and how do we communicate with spirit entities. And I think last week it was quite clear that music is certainly one of the most fundamental ways that people can communicate, but also you can communicate through dreams, you can communicate through literature, art, you can just, as I do now, just things come into my head. But one of the things that I think I've touched on, which is not something which is very familiar to me, of course, is mathematics, and then all the various disciplines of mathematics, such as calculus or geometry or whatever it might be. These things have obviously been picked up, I think, by religions over the years as a perfect way to not only describe the world around us, but also the world that goes on and the infinity of existence. Before we go into that in a bit more detail, because I'm fascinated by it, and I have been asked by a couple of my correspondents to discuss numbers, numerology, and sacred geometry, I must first of all completely put my cards on the table and tell you that I'm absolutely useless at mathematics. I always have been. I'm sure I always will be at my age. And I have never really understood mathematics at all. Like, you could almost say that I have a sort of, as we call it here in Germany, dyscalculia. And indeed, I think a couple of my relations have it as well, which is a complete inability, really, to handle numbers and get them right and in the right order, which is somewhat surprising since most of my life I've been a businessman dealing with numbers. But somehow you manage to get by with calculators and all of that sort of thing. And the second thing also, I will completely put my cards on the table, is that I am not good at music. It is something that I've loved and is very important to me in the listening sense. I've always been interested in trying to learn a musical instrument, but possibly linked to the fact that I'm useless at maths, I never managed to quite get myself into the habit of learning mathematics. Learning music. So there you go. It's just as difficult for me, I think, because I think it requires a level of patience, which I don't have. I've always been a little bit probably ADD, and I think you can't really be that if you want to concentrate on something like mathematics or music. So obviously my parents, they were both musicians, professional musicians. And my father was quite an accomplished and famous recording person. He was also a member of an opera company for many years and trained as a professional opera singer. My mother too. And in the last part of their life, they ended up working together, very much in the musical field, but never kind of passed on to me. My father always wanted me to have a proper job because he just thought I was never going to make money as a professional musician or an actor or anything else for that matter. So I just wanted to say that. So everything that comes through today is entirely not from my perspective. And if I get it terribly wrong, and because I'm trying to interpret what I'm hearing, I do apologize in advance. But I hope that the gist of things is true. So I've been racking my brains and thinking, how would I best summon something or someone, some entity, to help me be able to understand the importance of numbers or numerology or sacred geometry? What is the significance of numbers? And how does that relate to us living, and how does it relate to those that are in the other dimensions? So again, due to the magic of podcasts, I will quickly shut you off for a few minutes while I try to find out if anybody's there wanting to come and talk. Okay, so I'm back, and during that short space, which is only a few seconds for you, but a lifetime for me, which is part of the interest of time. There is no concept of time; it's whatever it is that you make of it. But while I was there, not only did Titan come through, but we're back again also with my friend Neil Peart, who was the drummer of Rush, and he passed away, I think, last year or the year before that. And he's popped in a couple of times and was actually one of the main motivations for me wanting to do this in the first place. And I've been wondering when he might make an appearance, and I've been told that he's kind of waiting here to talk to us a little bit about drumming and music and rhythm and the speed and the numbers and everything else. So let's see what we get here. So, hello, Neil. Thank you very much for coming through. Could you just tell us a little bit about where you find yourself and what are you doing at the moment? What do you get up to? He's telling me that what he's particularly enjoying now is he wants to stress again that he's not the Neil Peart that we remember him as being a rock musician, a member of a famous human band. He is obviously now, he's re-emerged into his former consciousness, and he's completely now aware of everything before, after, and the future, which again is something I think we'll talk about later. But he is completely involved in he's saying teaching, the word teaching, which he says he's absolutely interested in teaching. He's always been interested in teaching, even when he was in the human form. And he wants to be able to explain to me and through me various concepts which will perhaps help us have a better understanding. He also just wants to start this off with a preamble. He's saying that during his life, he wants this to go out to his family and friends who might remember. He would be the first person to not describe himself as a Christian, although he does describe the family environment, certain relatives and everything else who he felt were fairly Christian, and he feels that there was a lot of religion going on around him, particularly with his bandmates and their families, although he feels that none of the people really close to him were particularly religious in that sense. He's also saying to me that he would put his cards on the table too and say that right up front, he never absolutely gave any time at all in his living form to an acceptance that there was an afterlife or that there was anything beyond the human existence, and really said almost up until the last moment when he died, he really fundamentally believed that was it. It was just a big sleep, he says. However, clearly he has to reevaluate that now, and he seems to have a good sense of humor, and he says that he wants to start off by saying that one of the biggest challenges that he had to face at the point that he passed over was to remember and to reestablish his knowledge of how things should be. Because in life, he says, you can become so convinced about some particular thing, which is in a way the purpose of humanity, is to be convinced and to have that self-confidence, he says. And he was so driven and so forceful in the need for achieving what he wanted to achieve that he did put his beliefs very firmly into a rigid form. He said that he did try to learn a lot in his life, and he was very into trying to find explanations for everything he could see around him. But one thing he never managed to really fully understand was this idea of life after death. Having said that, he wants to talk about music, and in particular he does want to talk about rhythm and drumming. And he says that not a lot of people would know this unless they were drummers themselves or knew him. But he actually found that he was quite often using, I suppose it's called the pattern or something in drumming, of 7 notes. But he says, just don't forget The number 7 is a very special number for musicians, and he says all musicians will understand that because there are 7 notes. But 7 is a number that is something that has permeated nearly all of religions, and many divine things revolve around the number 7. So he wants to say straight away, and he's aware, he says that we've talked about this before, that as a musician, music is an incredibly important method of communicating stuff from where he is to where we are, and upwards, the other way around, he says. And he says that within music, it is very, very possible, and it is deliberate too, to insert rhythms and numbers of beats in the bar and the spaces in between, he says, these things that are the dividing things between notes are also very important. And within all of that, you can actually create a code, he's saying, a code that will allow information to be passed. And he says if you think of binary as ones and zeros, he says everything that we have in our earth now that is recorded by music or recorded in computers is done in zeros and ones. And he says we could start with that. He said, let's just start with that, and let's call this binary, this 0 and 1. The first problem, he says, that we have to overcome if we're going to understand the power of communication with spiritual entities through numbers and through music. The biggest problem, he says, is that our world is constructed in quite a logical way. The way we've evolved our society is to talk about things logically, and it's been very much a part of our society that mathematics is the predominant tool that we've used to try to explain everything. Mathematics, it seems, is the perfect science, the perfect tool to be able to explain how things are. And of course, it's only applicable in our Earth environment. And therefore, it's become an extremely powerful force. But he wants to stress that one of the things that he had to learn, and one of the things that is true where he is that it's not the same. He said that there are not 7 keynotes to music where he is. Rhythms are not the same. Sounds are not the same. They're not just the physical sound he says that is created by hitting sticks on skins, or hitting piano keys onto metal wires, or guitars that have vibrating strings. All of our technology, which is based on mathematical principles that we have pretty much discovered, are there for a logical reason, to enable us to feel comfortable within the creation that we have, within what has been created by us over thousands of years. But he says it is an artificial construct, and he said he wants to give another example. He said if you think about 1 and 0, 1 being often considered to be like on, and 0 considered to be off, or 1 being yes and 0 being no, he said there's a fundamental contradiction there, because 1 is a number, but 0, he says, isn't a number. And he says that he does remember reading when he was alive about this contradiction, and he just thought it was worth mentioning that there's always been a big controversy over the 0, because 0 isn't a number. It can't be divisible by anything. It is impossible. It doesn't exist. It's true. And yet it is so key to our understandings of mathematics, and our entire mathematical systems are created around the 0 concept. We understand 1, we understand 2, 3, 4, he said, but we don't understand 0. So 0 is an indescribable kind of nothingness, a kind of infinity. He said some scientists have tried to describe less than 0 as -1, but he said there is nothing called -1 either. There's nothing called 0. You could say 0 would be the absence of 1, he said, but -1 can't exist because he's saying you can't have the absence of something again once it's not absent, once it's absent. Boy, this is going to do my head in. Thank you, Neil. He said, yeah, but he's only saying that because he wants to give everyone the understanding that what we're talking about here is the zeros. Where he is, he's living in that 0 world where things are indescribable to us, but are just as real as we consider 0 and 1 to be real numbers and the backbone of our computers, our binary system, of our understanding of mathematics. And he said that's the first thing it's really important to get across. Okay. Secondly, he's talking about numbers in general. He says that numbers are a great way to encode things, and we've obviously found that as a species over the years. We've managed to code all the information that we've needed. He says that if you remember during the wars, it was a big talk about Enigma coding machines and the ability to code intricate information about everything in terms of numbers, and then to mix those numbers up. So you needed very sophisticated code decoders, very intelligent people or machinery, in order to be able to find what that code meant. He said that is the same now. We do this in our life all the time. He's talking about the Bitcoin technology that we have, or whether it's very, very complicated coding. It is all putting very complex stuff into numbers. He says, and that's before we even start talking about digital music or digital art or anything digital, which is all, again, the same. It's putting things that we can see or we can hear, and increasingly, he says, what we can touch, such as these machines that can actually create objects using computers. He said this is the fundamental of creation in our environment, but it's not even the beginning of the way things happen where he is now. And he can't really explain it to us because it's just way beyond our mental capacity to understand. But that's where it comes from. That's why if a spirit wishes to communicate to us, using mathematics or using music is an incredibly useful way to do it, because it's a direct conduit to our logical understanding of things, and it makes it much easier for us to be able to decode the messages that are held within. Okay, so Neil now says that he's managed to basically explain that there are the two sides of this. There is the side of music and mathematics and that sort of communication that we will be able to understand, and then there is another side to it, which, if you like, you can call the zeros, which are impossible for us to understand because it involves concepts, he says, such as infinity, that is not something that we are able to deal with, because it's not relevant to our earth experience. But from where he is, he lives in that sense of infinity, he says. Everything is happening automatically according to the way things should happen, the way that people are thinking they should happen, the way people around him, he says, are creating things, how he is part of that creation and making it happen. There is so much, there is such a web of that creativity, and he's aware of it all simultaneously at the same time. But equally, he can communicate with people in our plane if he wishes to. And of course, it's easy for him to communicate if he wanted to us in any way he would want to do it, but we wouldn't be able to receive him. We wouldn't be able to understand him. So he has to use, in his particular case, he's very interested in using music. And he's very interested in teaching people in our realm, and he has been doing that, and he's in contact with people, he says, and helping them understand exactly what's going on. And he's actually helping them compose music, which he still does, directly to them through drummers and through other musicians, he says. as well as giving ideas to people. So that's kind of his interest, and he's having quite a lot of fun. As one of the zillions, he says, of the things that he does is actually doing that as well. And he just thought this was a good entry point for him to come and talk to me. He said that he'd held back a few months ago from directly talking to me because he was a bit nervous about people left behind. But he says that he's pretty sure now that my message has got through, and they may not be communicating that they've got this message, but he knows that they have, and he knows that people who know people have already communicated with his family. So he's very happy now to help and talk. Well, Neil, then again, perhaps it wasn't always your strength to discuss numerology, but could you explain about some of the history of that and how is it relevant and is it real? He said that it's actually not true. He said he was a great reader, and he certainly enjoyed reading stuff like that. And he said in quite a lot of his works he referenced that numerology and numbers and the importance of numbers, not least because of the musical importance of numbers and beats in the bar and all the different aspects where numbering is very important in music, but also in his lyrics and also in his understanding of music. But he would say that numerology is something that obviously he saw as a rather esoteric concept when he was alive. But now, of course, he understands that it has an incredibly good meaning. It's used as this vehicle of communication. And he said that you've got a couple of correspondents who've mentioned numbers, and so let's talk about that. He said that it's very intuitive for a musician to see patterns in numbers. But it's also very easy for humans to be able to see patterns in numbers as well who are not particularly trained in mathematics or music. It's a way of getting your attention, he said. So he said it's been discussed many times, but it's a deliberate process that you could have numbers such as 666, he says. If you think about 666, he said that's everyone listening, he says, will know what that means. They've heard it from your Bible, he said, and it was in fact used in movies and popular culture to describe perhaps a beast of a human or something like that, or the Antichrist if you believe in the Christian faith. But he says it's very interesting because if you look at 666 and then you start seeing the synchronicity of those numbers, he says, because he says 666 is also is relevant to the basis of humanity, because we as humans are made essentially from carbon atoms, and as a carbon-based life form, it's very interesting to note. He says this is quite interesting that the element of carbon is also has an atomic number of 6, and he says that the molecules that make up carbon are made up of 6 electrons, six electrons, he's saying, and 6 neutrons, and 6 something else. I can't quite get what he's saying there. But they're made up of 666. And he said that's very fitting given the fact that human beings are made of carbon. But he said, if you like, that's probably where it all came from, that a human form would be related to 666. And he's also saying that 777 and the number 7, which is a number that he's always been fascinated with. He says he's always enjoyed the number 7, but 3 times 7. And the number 3 is, again, something very, very important. It's been used in all sorts of religions. It's always a divine, significant number, 3, whether it's in religion with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, or the 3 something or others. There'll always be 3, or there'll be 7. And he says that this is obviously something that is so much part of human history. And it's been passed on to generation after generation. And it is completely real, and the things that these numbers hold are completely true. He says that the information from a group of numbers can be as real as the information from a book. They're the same as when you feel impulses from crystals, or whether you feel information coming from divine sources. The numbers are just, again, another vehicle of getting your attention and allowing you to channel into something, into the in-betweens, or the subdivisions, he's saying, between the numbers, the subdivisions between the impressions that you're getting. So he says, pay attention to numbers. Pay attention, as he says, Esther, one of my correspondents, she feels constantly that she's getting information from numbers that are repetitive and coming up in the same numbers in the same sequence in all sorts of ways. And he's saying, yes, this is very normal. You end up seeing it in your phone numbers or in your electricity bill, he said, or you'll see it on television, or you'll suddenly go to a swimming pool and you'll get a locker with the same numbers, or it's there because it's getting your attention. And when it gets your attention, you need to pay attention at that point, he says, and think about what's coming through. He's saying it's like this. It's a knock on the door that an entity is trying to communicate with you, and it's communicating with you and getting your attention by drawing your attention to significant numbers that mean something to you. Okay, Neil, could you, on behalf of my friend Linda, perhaps pick up on geometry and sacred geometry? What's your understanding of that, and how does that work? And he says that the most fascinating thing about creation, and again he says he doesn't expect us to fully understand all of this, but if you think about it, if from his point of view, his creation, which is manifested through conscious thought, and it's not just him; it's a collective consciousness. It's a consciousness. It's a desire to make something happen. He said you could call it magic, but it's mind over matter. It's the ability to create things that you think. And in our realm, obviously, because that's what we're in at the moment, it's much easier for us to see it in terms of a logical creation. And he says that's why perhaps for a long time scientists have tried to explain things and try to see it in terms of what they call their scientific model, enabling everything to be explained logically and rationally and repeatably. And if it fails those tests, it's not considered to be scientific and it's considered to be bogus. But he said that's unfortunately a huge flaw, because it doesn't take into account the zeros, he says. It doesn't take into account what cannot be seen, that cannot be repeated. But he says we are learning now with things such as quantum theories that these zeros and what's happening in the space in between, and what is happening in what is almost rather interestingly called dark matter, which we can't explain but makes up most of the universe, is in fact the zeros, is in fact the unseen, is in fact what we can't explain because we're not able to understand it yet. And he says that within our human existence, we're really not going to have a great stab at being able to understand it. But he said that's not a problem. We'll understand enough. And he said that other races and other civilizations will make contact with us and enable us to understand a bit more of it because they've already managed to master it to some degree or not. But he said in terms of geometry and shapes, they are another way of communicating with people. That's all it is. He says it's nothing magical per se in a triangle or a Star of David or a circle or a cross. But you put a cross, he says, in front of someone, and it means a huge amount to them if they're a Christian or even a non-Christian, or a Star of David. These are very important signs and geometrical shapes that allow a communication from a group of consciousness that represent that shape or have invested a lot of effort in that shape. He's saying, we have invested a lot of effort into recognizing feelings and emotions that shape represents. And that geometry is very important. In terms of geometry, he said you could talk about the way bodies are built, or the way nature is designed, or the way plants grow, or the way leaves are distributed. All of this is following a mathematical geometric pattern. because that's the easiest way, again, in our reality, for things to be created and for things to be repeated. Things tend to have a certain number of chromosomes, a certain number of eyes, a certain amount of a certain atomic number, a certain geometric form. Again, all related to mathematics, because it's a very easy way to convey to us and the information that we need, but it's very easy for us to repeat it and understand it and be able to develop our own systems, our own science, and move things forward. He mentioned that architecture is quite interesting, and a lot of in the early days and more recently, architects of religious buildings quite often used mathematics and geometry. It's a very significant and important thing, he says, in these sciences. But it's again no surprise, he says, because you can express through mathematics and geometry religious and divine interpretation. And a lot of architects who are producing buildings, and he's putting into my mind one of the buildings I know but I haven't seen in Barcelona, the Sagrada Familia that Antonio Gaudí built. And he's saying, yes, prime example, Philip, prime example of an architect who used mathematics in order to try to express, as he saw it, the divine nature of creation. And he said, if you look at that cathedral, it's totally built based on geometric, sacred geometric principles. So he says that actually he's got to be going, but he says that he's given enough for now. He says that's the fundamentals, is that numerology, numbers, music, beats to the second, seconds, timing, all of this stuff, which is an artificial human construct, is very, very important from his realms as a method of communicating with us. And it's a kind of an encoding of reality, and it enables it's a very good way, he says, for us to communicate with you and to put ideas into your head and help get things going that we're trying to do and trying to help you with. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming, Neil. Okay, and lastly, a question that came from Esther today, actually. She wanted to know about, and I should have actually asked Neil this, but I will ask Titan. Hopefully Titan's going to be listening to this. So Titan, the question is, do you know about past, present and future at the same time, or do you have a sense of time? I think, actually now I'm thinking about it, Neil did mention that it's all simultaneous to him. And he has a sense of everything simultaneously. And let me see if I can get in touch with Titan and ask her to quickly answer that question. Okay, so I have Titan here. So, yes, that question. I mean, could you briefly just explain your knowledge of past, present, future? Is it all together? Do you have a sense of time? Titan is saying that, we have discussed this before. It's something that I think it should be self-evident by now, is that every entity that's where he is and beyond him and around us has a tremendous sense of the past, the present and the future. Because everything, once you pass on, he says, becomes obvious to you. As Neil said, it takes to be where they are for them to suddenly understand and remember that there is no past, there is no present, there is no future. There is just it's very hard to describe. It's just this. There is this open plan happening of stuff, and in order to make sense of things on our earth plane, it's important that we have something that goes in line with our life and our death, our birth and our death, she says. We have to understand that there is a progression We see things dying. We see things moving on. We see things getting old. We see things oxidizing. And in our history, we see the sun come up and go down. We see the moon coming up and down. We see rhythms and we see patterns. And because, again, she's saying, because of mathematics being such an important part of our civilization, of the way we work, that has created a way for us to understand, as we think, she says, what existence is all about. But it's just a fraction of it. And in fact, it does cloud to quite a large extent the reality of what's going out there, because if we fall slave, she says, to mathematics and what we consider to be a logical explanation for everything through our science, we then become completely blind to which is the vast majority, she said, of creation and existence that does not obey our rules of science, our rules of logic, does not have a sound that we would ever be able to hear, does not look like anything we could ever see, she says, is something that is way beyond our understanding of touch. It baffles our senses. It's something that is not of our senses. It's of senses that we do not use really much and that we do not have in our present form. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It is there, but we're not really able to comprehend it. But we will, once we die, we will get that chance to remember again and be part of it all. So in that sense, where she is standing, she has a complete understanding of my past, she's saying, my present, and she obviously does know my future. But she says that it is generally understood where she is standing that you should massively distrust any entity that's coming through that is somehow purporting to assist you to know your future. That is not right. It is something that you should be extremely careful about. And she said, she's again mentioned this before, be very, very careful about people who call themselves psychics, who try to help you understand what your future is going to be. No legitimate entity would ever help any human entity do that on behalf of someone else or even for them. It's pointless, because it's as totally pointless as, telling somebody what happens. She says if you've got a puzzle and you tell them how to do the puzzle before they do it, or she says, or handing them a book and telling them what happens on every single page before they've even read it, or watching a movie and having told them before you go to the movie, I think we call it spoiling, yes, she says, before you actually see the movie. So there is no point, there's nothing to be achieved other than perhaps some sort of morbid gratification, she said, during your life. The purpose of life is to live life, and it's not to know what's going to happen. Everything happens for a reason. Everything to a certain extent has been planned out for a reason, by me, by us, she says, by you, and by the people you spend eternity with. There would be no point. You might as well just stop now and go back to your energy consciousness and try again. And she says this is why it's so important that you realize that your life is for living, and all the entities are trying to do is to help you and to generally help you learn and educate and to move on and to become spiritually more evolved, because that is the whole purpose of why we are here. But this isn't the only here that we will ever see or be part of. And she's obviously aware where she is of all the different heres that exist, she says, and all the different times. But even time, you've got to understand, is something that is a concept that just doesn't exist. It's a manufactured concept that enables us to understand where we are. And she just wants to say before she goes as well, that in terms of like Neal's discussion about using music and beats and rhythm and notes, she says it is so important that we realize that this is something that is really ancient. It's not modern. It's something that is very ancient and has always been. One of the best ways for humans to contact the entities outside of their realm, but also for the entities outside their realm to contact us. And it's no mistake that this is a legitimate and important form of communication, because it's this. She says it's because it falls between two seats. It falls between our rules of how things should be mathematically, and in terms of things we can understand, and the way things really are, which are things that we just cannot understand and can't convey in any other way than perhaps through feeling and emotion, which and way beyond that, which are using senses we just do not have and cannot understand at the moment. But music is mixing that together in order to be able to get a point across. Okay, well, thank you very much, Titan, and thank you, Neil. And I think that was a very interesting session, and I certainly have got a much better understanding of the importance of numbers and numerology, geometry, past, present, and future. And thank you, and see you soon.